Scott. I am Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor at Baylor University in the economics department, and I am filming this from Torino, Italy, where I have been for the last week and a half and where I will be to the end of June. Today marks a special milestone in the podcast. It is our 100th episode. For the last 3 seasons, we've been on a journey together and with the guests to listen to people's stories, witness who they are, pay attention to them and to their life story, hoping, at least I am, hoping that the experience of listening to them and being present to them will change me, change you too, I hope. It's a way of contributing also to an oral history of the economics profession, which I hope is valuable for all of you. For this significant episode, I'm thrilled to have a very special guest, Manisha Shah. Manisha is the Chancellor's Professor of Public Policy at UC Berkeley, development economist whose primary research and teaching interests lie at the intersection of applied micro, health, and development economics. She originally received her PhD from Berkeley, made groundbreaking contributions in several areas, including the economics of sex markets, which is how I know her, how I first got to know her. Her work aims to develop more effective policies and programs to combat HIV, other sexually transmitted infections, also deeply involved in child health, education, leading impactful projects in Tanzania, Indonesia, India, and she's worked extensively in Ecuador and Mexico. On a personal note, she is not just a colleague. She is also one of my closest friends, if not my closest friend in the profession. We worked together for at least a decade, 9 years on just one paper, but even longer than that. And when you work with a person, as many of you know, that the job in economics can be very lonely. And so having co-authors that also over time become your close friend is really special. We're not on this planet for very long, and it's really nice to have that. So we've collaborated on several projects, including that one that I mentioned, and I'm just so proud of her achievements, inspired by her dedication, her leadership, her impact on her field. She's a leading scholar in development and health economics, but then frankly, she is the most impactful scholar on sex work in economics, and that does not even, none of that even compares to what a truly great human being she is. So it is so proud and so grateful to have her be my 100th guest. So join me as we delve into her journey, her research, her insights. Thank you so much for supporting the Mixtape with Scott and for being part of this incredible journey. Here's to the 100th episode and to many more episodes till we're done with this podcast oral history. So turning it over now. Well, it is a pleasure to have with me on the show one of my oldest friends, Manisha Shah. Manisha, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Scott.
For the sake of the listener, can you tell us your full title and who pays your paycheck?
Yes, my full title is I'm the Chancellor's Professor of Public Policy, and UC Berkeley pays my paycheck.
Oh, the Chancellor's. Is that's I didn't know you had that. I didn't know you had a fancy name.
I have a fancy title now. And in fact, I was just telling Scott, I'm in my new office at Goldman, which is very white because I haven't had time to decorate yet.
Oh, it's cool. I like it. Well, let's do an icebreaker. So tell me a vacation that you took, that you've taken before. Doesn't have to be your favorite vacation or anything like that, but it's something that you've thought about a few times since you took the vacation.
Oh, that's tough. Can I tell you? So two come to mind. And they're both from my childhood. So when I was a kid growing up, we used to go on a lot of long camping trips. We had a VW van, and we would like drive around the country in this VW van and basically show up at national parks and hike and camp. And there was one long trip where we drove to Yellowstone. And I think I remember the trip because this was the 70s, right? So you would just sit in the car and look out the window, but like this was looking out the window for hours and
Yeah.
hours. So I remember that. And then the other thing I remember is my dad used to pick up hitchhikers because we had this big van, right? And I remember he picked up this old man who was hitchhiking who sat next to me and anyways, I think about that now as a parent myself, like
You're like, sorry, keep going. Don't look, kids. We're going to speed up.
exactly. Yes.
That's awesome. I can't believe you got to do the VW van summers. That's awesome.
It was a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh. I've always wanted to do that. All right. Well, so where did you grow up?
So I grew up, I was actually, I was born in Mountain View, California, in the early 70s. And I grew up mostly in Saratoga, which is a little town. It was a little town at the base of the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's changed a lot now because of the whole tech boom in the Silicon Valley.
Okay. 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 Huh. Wait, so is that when you said all those Saratoga and stuff, that's kind of the Bay Area? Should I think of
Yeah,
like,
that's the Bay Area. Yes,
okay. Okay.
it's the South Bay.
Okay. So what'd your mom and dad do for a living?
So the reason I was born there. So both of my parents came to the US in the 60s and they ended up in Madison, Wisconsin because my dad was doing a master's degree in electrical engineering. And then he started looking for a job after he was done with the degree and ended up working at Fairchild, which was, the Silicon Valley before it became the Silicon Valley. And so
Oh.
that's why we were there and why we've sort of, why we grew up there.
Wait, so Fairchild, what is that? Is that company still around? I don't know that company.
No, but it was one of the early semiconductor companies. So they were in the
Oh,
business of making semiconductors.
huh. How
And,
long did he stay in that? Did
I
he
mean, for
stay
many
there?
years, I should mention, I don't want to be sexist here. My mom, my mom was a social worker, so she had an MSW. But she never worked as a social worker because the story is that she had a job in New York being a social worker. He had a job in the Bay Area and they
Oh.
had to pick a location. My mom was newly pregnant with my brother, and so they picked the Bay Area. Um,
Hmm.
and to this day, my mother, who is 81 now, is a little bitter that they prioritized his career and she ended up like never working as a social worker.
She didn't want to work as a social worker in the Bay Area?
She did, but then she got pregnant and, she
Oh,
ended up having three kids and she was mostly a stay-at-home mom. And, she did a few like odd accounting type jobs, but she never worked as a social worker.
got it. Got it. Yeah. Well, so you had some siblings. You had a brother, and then what else? You have a
Yeah, so
sister too,
I
right?
I have an older brother and I have a younger sister. So
Oh, okay.
I'm the middle child.
Middle child.
Yeah.
Did you guys play together when you were little? Y'all
We
were
did.
close enough in age?
My brother and I, we played together. Honestly, I feel like we fought a lot. My brother and I were very competitive with each other because there's only a 3-year difference and he was older and I always wanted to like do everything he did and be as smart as he was. So and to this day, I would say we're probably still competitive with each other. My younger sister, she was 6 years younger than me and 9 years younger than my brother. So she was much more like the baby of the family.
Yeah.
And, you
So
know,
like when y'all left, she was like she kind of got to be an only child.
exactly,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
what I had. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Where'd your brother go to college? Where'd your
So,
brother and sister go to college?
so my brother went to UC Berkeley undergrad, and then he went to GW for medical school. He's a doctor.
Oh, he's a doctor.
He's a
Okay.
doctor. And then my sister went to undergrad at UCLA. And then she actually did graduate work in Belfast at Queen's University. She's a PhD in aerospace engineering.
Oh, dang. Wow. Well, so what kind of games and fun stuff did you do when you were little? What kind of stuff made you happy?
I was a pretty introverted child when I was little,
Oh,
and I read a lot.
oh,
We I think part of why my brother and I fought a lot is he was very much the stereotypical, rowdy boy running around outside. And I think I was very much the stereotypical girl. I stayed indoors a lot. I hung out with my mom a lot. I read a ton of books. I was
Mhm.
a big reader. Like that was my favorite thing to do when I was little, was to just kind of sit in my room and read a book.
Were you going to the library, like riding your bike to the library?
Yes, I would go to the library like once a week and pick up, 7 or 8 books and
Yeah.
go through them all. And then I had this thing, we had a few libraries near us, and I still remember like one time I lost a book. So then I would like not go back to that library for a while.
Yeah. No. I totally remember that kind of stuff. Oh my God. You got to ghost the library.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. You're like, they're gonna notice that I'm not there because I'm there every day. So um okay, that's awesome. So what did you want to be when you were grow up? What did you want to be when you grew up when you were reading all those books? Did you ever think about that?
I think I did. I mean, I think I was going to say another one of my big activities was I really loved art, and I actually painted for many years. Um,
Oh,
and so I always think it's a bit ironic that I ended up being an economist, because I think in my younger days, like reading, writing, art, humanities, like those were my first loves.
mm,
And then I remember I got to junior high and I took this architecture class, and I actually won like this award in the county for my design. And so I was
wow.
a very creative person.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what happened. I think maybe just somewhere along the way, I felt like I wasn't good enough, like to be an artist or a writer, like you have to be extremely talented. And maybe I just felt like I would never make it in that world. Or, I think about this now. I'm not sure what happened, but I sort of,
Mm.
once I got to high school and college, a lot of those interests went away. And then, I mean, I will tell you, I still, will go to an art museum every city that I'm in. I still love looking at art, but I no longer paint or draw or, do any of those things that I did a lot of as a child.
You gonna do all Jackson Pollock on those blank walls behind you?
Maybe.
They're gonna come. They're gonna come in. You're just throwing paint everywhere. That's awesome. I didn't even know any of this. Good grief. Well, so then you go to high school. So
Yeah.
what kind of stuff, how big was that high school that you went to?
So the high school was 9 through 12, and it was probably around like 1,200 kids-ish, 12 to
Mm,
1,500 kids. Yeah.
mm, okay. Okay. What kind of stuff, as you're sort of like becoming a young girl, a young lady,
Yeah.
what are you noticing that your interests changing as you like, or what kind of stuff are you liking to do in high school? Like,
Yeah.
what did I found you doing on the weekend?
I was gonna say, I think I became much more extroverted during high school. I'm not
Hmm.
sure what happened, but and maybe there were a few formative things that did happen. I was gonna say, like in terms of high school activities, I start getting more involved in things like speech and debate, um,
Oh,
and also student office. So I become vice president of my high school
oh.
class and things. I think things like that.
What made you want to be doing that kind of stuff?
I'm not sure. I think I've always really liked this idea of researching things and then arguing my point. Like
Right.
I was always very good at that at home. And I think so part of this is, I grew up, my parents are immigrants from India. I
Hmm.
had an older brother. And I always fought for equal rights in my household.
Right.
And I have a very like highly rational father. And so the way to get my way with my dad was always to construct a very kind of rational, like good argument.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that at a very young age with him.
Uh,
And I think it really like helped me later in life. I was very good at things like speech and debate and
uh,
which is ironic, right? Because I was a very introverted, quiet child.
Wait,
But
did you notice you coming out of your shell when you got into speech and debate? Or was it kind of just generally you started to change?
I think it was generally, there was another big influence in high school. I did this program. this program is called Amigos de las Americas, where you basically train for 1 year to go spend the summer in some country in Latin America, where you will then basically do like, it wasn't called this back then, but like international development work or like service. And so I did this whole training for a year where you have to raise money to fund your own trip. You have to do all sorts of, training. So I don't know what that was about. And I spent and then you get placed. So I spent the summer in the Andes Mountains in Ecuador.
Oh,
We
what
have
year is this? What grade are
this.
you in?
I turned 16 that summer. So I
Okay.
did this whole thing my junior year and then got, placed that summer of my junior year.
And where is it you're
Um,
going your junior year?
I spent the summer in Ecuador. But
Oh,
like in the Andes Mountains in the middle of nowhere, like no phone, no communication, you're just writing letters.
what do you
Because
mean? What are you writing letters about?
like
Who
when
are you
you,
writing?
to my family, for
Oh, to
example,
your family. Got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there was no, we were so remote.
Oh, is it
Um,
who? It was other kids went with you?
yeah, so I was in this town with two other kids who were also placed there, who I met that summer.
Well, so
Um,
what was the purpose of going to that thing?
so I mean, I was there to build latrines.
Oh,
And so we had trained all year in terms of like learning how to build them, et cetera. But I get there, and what I realized was everyone there already knew how to build latrines.
hmm.
The thing we were actually doing was bringing in the supplies and the resources, because, while people wanted to have latrines, they didn't have the money for the cement and to kind of bring all the resources and supplies in. And so part of this program and like part of us going there and part of the
Hmm.
fundraising we were doing, honestly, was just to kind of help facilitate that process. And so we
Hmm.
spent the summer building latrines, but honestly, it was much more of a summer where I learned, I learned how to build latrines from the people who lived there because they did a lot of the hard work. We were just kind of
Hmm.
helping.
Hmm. Wow, that's really cool. Um, so if I could have eavesdropped on your teachers in the faculty lounge in high school, like maybe 11th grade, and they were talking about that young lady, Manisha Shah, what would they have probably been saying about you? What do you think? What kind of kid would they have said? She's like this, and she's gonna probably do this kind of thing. Like, what did the adults think about you?
I think, I mean, look, I was very academically motivated in high school.
Mm.
Um, I did really well. And so they would have probably said I would be, I was motivated, probably going to get into a good college. I think it was unclear though what I was going to do, right? Like I don't think they could have predicted like what job I would have, for example,
Mhm.
because even then I didn't know. I will say that when I came back from this Ecuador experience, I became even more interested in international development.
Oh.
I think I've always been interested in it because I will say we spent, summers that we weren't going to national parks. We actually spent many summers of my childhood going to India to visit my grandparents who lived there at the time. And I
Oh.
think those summers were also very formational because you know, again, it was back in the day when nothing was available in India, right? Like this was pre-globalization, pre kind of global trade. And so
Mm.
we would spend summers there and not, there was no Coca-Cola back then. And, there
Mm.
like all the Levi's jeans, like there was nothing. And so
Mm.
it was a very, and I will tell you, we kind of, as kids, we dreaded those summers. We didn't want to go. Um, but again, you think back as an adult, and I think those were very formational summers, right? Because you actually like, I saw child labor happening in my grandmother's household and didn't know it was child labor, right? You see all these things happening in front of you as a kid. You don't know what to call them,
Right.
but they have big impacts, I think, on the rest of your life. And I
Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
do remember thinking like, why is it so poor here? And then we go home to the Silicon Valley, right? And it's another world and it's rich and everybody has access to everything. And I
Mm,
never really, you don't understand, why do your cousins have nothing and why do you have everything, right? And kind of
mm,
what is you won this lottery in some sense, right? By being born in the United States, and many of your family members did not win that same lottery, right?
right,
And I think all
right.
of those things were, when you see those things as a child, they mean a lot.
You and your brother and sister, do you ever remember having any kind of conversations about those kinds of things when you would come back? Is it something
Mm,
that everybody was sort of noticing, the little kids?
I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like I had less of those conversations with my siblings and maybe more of them with my dad.
Mm,
My dad has always been one of these immigrants who's so pro-American and so pro-opportunity and, really kind of instilling the idea of like, you can be anything, you can do anything in this country, right? And I think part of that is because he came from a place where he felt like that was never true, right? And
right, right, right.
um,
Oh,
so we're
huh,
we're very much the American dream family, I think, in some sense.
wow. So, what kind of classes did you like in high school that you were
Mm.
super excited about?
I would say my kind of three favorite subject areas were I loved English,
Hmm.
I loved Spanish, and I loved math.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I would say the things I hated like physics and chemistry. I just was not a science person, but I loved all the math and I loved all the writing and the this I really loved studying Spanish as well. And in fact, continued to study Spanish for many years after that as well.
Oh wow. Are you fluent in Spanish?
I
Because you were over
am.
there. Oh wow.
Yeah, I am.
That's cool. I'm in Italy right now, and I basically just say ciao and buongiorno nonstop, and then I just speak English, and then they figure out that I want something a coffee. Okay, so you go to Berkeley. Were you excited to be going to Berkeley, even though you're from the Bay Area? Or is that like always what you wanted to do?
No, I was very unexcited about going to Berkeley. So as I told you, I was born and raised in the Bay Area, and I really wanted to go to the East Coast for college.
Hmm.
And I I had only applied to BU and Harvard on the East Coast. So in retrospect, I think about it, and I don't know what I was thinking because I hadn't even applied to that many East Coast colleges. I did not get into Harvard. I
Mhm.
got into VU and I really wanted to go there. But my father was basically like, you got into UC Berkeley, which is, back then it was probably one third, maybe even one fourth the price of, sending a kid to BU. And so he was like, I'm not going to pay, basically, I will support you 100% financially if you go to Berkeley. I'm not going to pay for, you to move to Boston.
Yeah,
And
I will
so
pay
I actually
25% of your tuition at BU.
So I was a very grumpy, my first year I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to be here this close to home. And,
Huh.
but in the end, I think it was actually the
Wait,
best.
so what year is that? Are you like class of 92, high school?
High school, I was class of 91.
91? So you go to Berkeley.
Yeah.
So Berkeley, I guess, was just different back then. It's not like this, now it's like, or was it? Now it's just, one of the best universities one of the best public universities
Yeah.
and one of the best universities, period. So like, was it different back then? It didn't feel that way to you?
No, I think it was still very much, one of the best public universities back then, especially. I mean, so here's the thing. Back then, when you were a kid growing up in California, the UCs, the dream was sort of getting into Berkeley and UCLA, and then kind of many of the other UCs, the sort of more second or third tier UCs were like safety schools, right?
Mhm.
These days, like almost every UC has become a dream school because it's so competitive now to get into any of the UCs.
Mm,
But I think, getting into UC Berkeley was definitely like a big deal, right? Even
yeah,
back
yeah.
then, just like it is now. And so I think that was part of it, of the if you got in there and you were a California resident, you went because it was a really like cheap and really good education. If, you know, if you didn't kind of sort of conditional on you being okay in this like massive public institution, right? With
Hmm.
classes
Hmm.
with a couple hundred kids.
Right, 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 right. So you get there. How do you start making friends when you get there? What do you do?
You know, I got there and I have to say I screwed around a lot. So, and this maybe part of this was because I was such a model student up in high school.
Yeah,
I think let me put it this way. I started screwing around senior year of high school after all of my college applications were done.
right. You know,
Um,
like they can't, they're not going to know all the stuff I'm about to start doing.
Exactly. And then I get to Berkeley and I am just like overwhelmed with like the freedom and the parties and the like, oh my God, you can do anything you want and you know, like you can eat anything. Like I basically, I think I ate a bowl of Captain Crunch like every day my
Ah,
freshman year because I had this mom who would never buy us like junk food cereal growing up or junk food in general. And so like
yeah.
it was just, you know, junk food party. Like yeah, I had a lot of fun my freshman year.
So what classes are you starting to take? Did you have to declare your major pretty much immediately?
I didn't. And
Okay.
so I went to UC Berkeley thinking I wanted to keep doing international development work because I was still very interested in that. And so I
Hmm.
start taking classes that are related to the development studies major.
Hmm.
Um, and so
Is
these
that like development economics or is that something different?
No, it's something, well, there's no econ really in development studies. I would say it's much more all the other social sciences. So like
Hmm.
anthropology and political science or, you know, those are the sort of the classes that I'm taking.
Hmm.
I would say it was a lot of Marxism, right, because the early 90s,
Yeah.
a lot about colonialism and how colonialism negatively impacts, you know, the
Yeah.
developing world.
Hmm.
Um, I start taking like kind of gender related classes. I remember I was taking like a few ethnic studies classes.
Hmm.
So sort of like going towards that major.
Yeah.
Um, and then so, you know, my father is kind of like, what are you going to do with your life if you major in development studies? You know, and immigrant father, like very concerned about financial stability. And he sort of starts encouraging me to, why don't you also like try and take some economics courses? Because I remember with this major, you could actually take econ. Um,
Hmm.
I just wasn't. And you know, and here's the other thing. I told you I was good in math, but kind of I had stopped doing a lot of math.
Hmm.
Um, I had, you know, I will tell you, I had a very negative experience with math in that in when I was in high school. I don't think I've ever told anyone this, Scott, but so my high school didn't offer calculus. So
Oh.
my senior year, I actually went to the community college to take calculus because I wanted to keep studying math. And I was struggling. It was hard. And there was a tutor who, you know, who was assigned to the class. And I kind of started going to this, you know, tutor. And on Valentine's Day, I still remember he brings me a dozen roses.
The TA does?
Yes.
Oh, geez.
And I was mortified. I was very innocent in high school. I was sort of mortified. I didn't know how to handle it. And guess what I did? I never went back to that class. Like that was the end. And then I like never did any more, you know. So I sort of think back to it now and I'm like, how unfortunate, right? But this was why I dropped out of this calculus class at this community college. And kind
Yeah.
of all that to say, like I'm, you know, back at Berkeley, my father encourages me to take econ, and the first economics class I take is Christina Romer. She
Oh,
used to
really?
teach this like massive undergrad econ class,
Huh.
and I really liked it, and I really liked her. I mean, I don't even know if I ever interacted with her. This was like a 300 plus student
Hmm.
class. But I still remember her lecture. She was very warm. She used to, talk about her kids. And
Mm.
again, the reason I'm raising this is, what I didn't know is that Christina Romer would be the first and only female professor of economics I would have at Berkeley for the rest of my career there, right? So
Oh,
in a way, like I had this great kind of opening class with her. I like it. I remember like telling my dad, oh, it was fun. Like in the end, what I end up doing is I end up double majoring, right? So I get my development studies degree, but I also double major in economics.
oh.
And so
See,
that's
she had such an impression. She had a real impression on you.
it
She had a
is,
big
yeah.
impression. Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
like
it
to
was
talk
it was
about
both her and the material, or it was like
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I would say it was okay. It was both her and the material. And the other thing that I really liked about the economics classes, so in contrast to all the development studies classes, where I felt like all we did was really complain about the state of the world and how difficult things were and how bad colonialism was. It just felt like we would get together, but there was never any like solutions, right? There was
Yep.
never any like, hey, this is how we get out of this mess. These are like policies that might help.
Mm.
But what I loved about economics was that economics is very prescriptive, right? Like,
Mhm.
here's the model, here's the, here are the, like, it just felt much more like, hey, if you want to solve problems in the world,
Mm.
economics has tools that can
Mhm.
help you solve those problems, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one could argue that maybe econ goes too far, right? In
Mhm.
kind of, hey, we can solve all the world's problems. But I think as a young person, that was very attractive to me because I just felt like I got tired of the complaining.
Yeah.
And,
Sure.
I've always been like I want to do something. I want to like
Right.
make the world
Yeah,
a
because you're
better
like
place.
going to Ecuador and you're like watching inequality and probably thinking I would like it to, to do something to kind of make a dent in it.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yes.
Wow. Well, so at what point in that college experience are you thinking, are you thinking when you graduate, are you thinking I want to be an economist, or do
Yeah.
you do something else after you graduate?
No, I'm yeah, definitely not thinking I want to be an economist. In fact, what I'm thinking I want to go abroad and do international development work.
Oh,
But I'm also like I don't want to do it. I don't know why, but early on I knew I didn't want to do the Peace Corps.
you knew you
Sort
did
of I
not?
wanted a real job
Oh,
in development. And so I graduate from UC Berkeley and in the end cannot find a job in international development because nobody wants to hire somebody with a BA, to go abroad.
right.
And so I'm kind of I still remember I was struggling, right? I didn't, because the econ path was very much you can go into like consulting or finance, and I knew I didn't want to do that. I sort of knew all the things I didn't want to do, right? I knew I didn't want to do the Peace Corps. I really wanted to go abroad. Maybe, I was thinking international organizations as well, like
Hmm.
UN. None of that ends up panning out for me.
Hmm. I don't know a lot about the Peace Corps. I've never heard anybody say who could have gone that didn't want to do it. What was the deal back then?
It just like it felt it sort of just felt like people posted abroad via the Peace Corps. Like to me, they weren't doing very interesting work,
Hmm.
It felt much more like the Amigos experience I had in Ecuador, which is like you're the American
Oh,
going somewhere without like a great skill set, but
hmm.
it just felt a bit imperialistic to me back then.
I
It
see.
wasn't clear that you were bringing much to the table. And I
Right,
think,
right.
I've always wanted to be someone who brings something to the table. And I think I realized that with a bachelor's degree, there's not much you're bringing to the table, right? And that
Sure.
I didn't have a huge amount of skills, et cetera. So I actually end up getting a job in San Francisco
Hmm.
at
So what is this? This is like 95?
95. Yeah, this is
Okay.
1995. And I get a job at Catholic Charities,
Uh-huh.
working. So Catholic Charities had an agreement with HUD. This is San Francisco. There was HUD had a program called HOPWA, which was housing opportunities for people living with AIDS.
Oh,
And
wow.
so
So
basically,
that's how you start getting exposed to AIDS. AIDS is right after college, 95?
exactly. So
Oh,
that
wow.
I will say right at 95. And also the other thing I did, God, I keep triggering.
I don't know why it's doing that.
Um,
It's all
is
this AI they have in here.
I also used to volunteer at the Berkeley Free Clinic and do HIV testing back in the early 90s as well for like
Wait, so is there anything prior to this job that would have made it clear that that would have been interesting? Were you interested in this topic at all?
I mean,
Actually,
no, no, I would say this was the first. So basically, volunteering at the Berkeley Free Clinic and doing HIV kind of counseling slash testing, and then getting this job in San Francisco for this HOPWA program is like the first time I start interacting with like the HIV/AIDS world.
yeah.
And my clients for the Hopwa program were all like low income residents with living with AIDS. And basically what I was doing was helping them get into housing because even though this subsidy existed for them, many landlords, even back then, right, were unwilling to rent to people like this. And, low income clients were living with AIDS. So I kind of, that was my first interaction, like with women who sold sex, for example, right?
Was it really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Um, and so I do this program, I work in this program for a year. And I'm very much working in like direct services. But then I start getting bored because
Yeah.
once I figure out the job, there's not much growth at a lot of these types of jobs, right? Because you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And in the
Hmm.
back of my mind, I'm still thinking I really still want to work in international development.
What does that mean to a young girl and college graduate, young Manisha? When you're thinking that, you must be comparing it somehow with this. So what's missing in your job that you
Just
think you
I
can?
I wanted to be abroad. Like I didn't want to be, remember, I'm still very much living in the Bay Area, which is where I was born and
Mm,
raised. And I've always just had this itch, right, to be elsewhere and to live in other countries and to work in
mm,
other countries. And I think I was still missing that. And
yeah.
so what I do then, so and I joke about this, but so I have this father who basically is willing to support his children financially when we're in school, but the second we're out of school, he cuts us off, right?
Mm.
And so I have this idea, which is I'm going to apply to the London School of Economics for a
Oh,
master's degree because,
yeah.
well, one, I want to like check out London.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You're wanting to finally get out of the Bay Area.
Two, it's a really good program, of course,
Yeah.
right? But and three, like I can quit my job and I know my dad will pay for it. So
Oh,
we
you're like, that's the loophole. Yeah. Your dad is like, oh, I've got to pay for school. So she's just going to keep going to school.
well, I joke, my brother has an MD and my sister and I have PhDs, and I'm like, this is the key to if you tell your kids you'll pay for their education and then they'll never leave school, right? So
Exactly. Right. Right.
um so
Wait, so
I
you go to
moved
LSE? You did your master's at LSE? I didn't know that.
I did. So I
I
moved
did
to
know that. I don't
London
remember
and
knowing that.
I did. Well, it's a lot early, right? I do it in 1997.
Oh,
It's 2 years. I graduated from Berkeley in 95, and then in 97 I moved to London.
oh.
Um,
You must have been just having so much fun. So being so excited living there.
it was so much fun. I have to tell you, I loved the LSC, but I also during that year get heavily into the drum and bass scene in London and
The
music.
what? The drum and bass scene?
Yes.
There's a drum and bass
There
scene? What is
was in 1997.
that? What is that?
And part of this is because I end up having two DJ roommates in London who
Oh,
kind of know everyone in the music scene and can get into every club. And so, it was a great time. I'm studying, doing a master's degree, but I will also tell you I had a lot of fun as well. Really kind of just getting into the London music scene.
your first year of every college and on, you're like, all right, first year I got to go completely crazy, and then I got to graduate and get a job.
I know,
or go
exactly.
to another college. So my dad will keep paying. That's awesome. I didn't know that. So how long were you at LSE? 2 years?
So the program is like an full year program, right? It's
Oh,
kind
it's
of
1 year.
it's a but it's like the whole year because you're writing your thesis and everything. So, it's like a 12. I was there like 12, 13 months basically.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Who'd you end up working with? Do you remember like who'd you write your thesis with?
So I wrote my thesis with this woman named Karen Kapadia,
Hmm.
who I have lost touch with, but I have to tell you, was one of the most supportive advisors. So
Hmm.
during my year, this is relevant. During my year at the LSC, so I wanted to write a dissertation on HIV AIDS in India.
You did.
I did
But at LSE, you're
at
thinking of
LSC. Yeah.
on a thesis or a dissertation?
Well, sorry, you have to write this like master's thesis type.
Okay, got it.
It was,
HIV AIDS in India, that's what you're wanting to do.
yes.
The interest in development is only getting bigger and it's getting this HIV part. It's
Yeah.
carrying forward. Got it. Okay.
Yes. And the year in LSE, I'm doing a lot more gender related classes as well. So I would say the interest in gender is also growing.
Got it.
So we had Karen Kapadia, there was like a period, I can't, I'm calling it spring break, but whatever, there was some period where we don't have classes. And she encourages me to actually go to India during this period and do some like primary field research, right? Talk to people, because part of what I was thinking about was like, what was the Indian government response? And now remember, this is 1997, right? So this is pre antiretroviral therapy, right? And so this is still if you live in the developing world and you get HIV, this is basically a death sentence, right? Like
Mhm.
10 years is kind of max for you in terms of lifespan after you get the diagnosis. And so I went to Bombay, and I still remember I went to the red light district and I went to brothels and I interviewed NGO, workers at NGOs. I
Real
talked
quick, where's your grandmother live? Are you
in
close? I
Bombay,
don't,
in Bombay.
she lives in Bombay. So you're seeing her a little bit?
Exactly. So I was my exactly.
Mm.
So I'm staying at my grandfather's, flat in Bombay. And
Huh.
then my dad has a cousin there. I still remember this because my dad's cousin loans me his driver and car.
Mm.
And the first day, the driver is like taking me to the red light district. And so he's calling, my dad's cousin to be like, is this okay? She wants to like go into these neighborhoods. And I feel nervous about like just letting her out there, and
Yeah.
anyway, so I spent a few days there and it was,
Huh.
I end up writing my thesis on this
What are
topic.
you doing over there? Are you getting data? Or is it just like ethnographic?
It was all just kind of informational interviews with people about the type of work they're doing, the type of interventions, the kind of government support they're getting. NACO back then, the National AIDS Control Organization in India, was very active and very kind of working in red light districts. And so, yeah.
So you're asking them like you're asking them things like unprotected sex, negotiating with the clients, like you're getting into those kinds of questions or what?
No, I would say back then it was much more, tell me about like the types of interventions that are happening here, right? That
Mm,
was with the NGOs. And then, talking to sex workers more about the type of work they were doing. Um,
mm,
and then with the government officials, it was much more like how are you addressing the epidemic? What types of things are you doing?
mm.
Like all the price stuff doesn't happen until later.
I see. So you come back. You did LSE pay for you to go over there?
No.
So you just went over there.
I just went
You're
over
like,
there because I knew I could stay with my grandfather. So
right, right. So
yeah,
you come back and you just crank out this thesis that's on this kind of
yeah,
political economy of HIV or something.
exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So you must have been really excited. So does that experience, what happens after that experience? Are you thinking, now you got a master's in LSE. Are you done in your mind? Like, I'm done. I got what I need finally to get the job that has the higher career in it? Or are you like, I'm not done?
No, that's exactly it. I'm like, I'm done. I had such a great experience, doing this work. This is kind of the type of work I want to do. I have this LSC degree now. I really want to get an international job.
Mm.
Um,
What
you know,
was your dream job? What were you thinking? It's like, what are the dream jobs at that time?
I think my dream jobs were still very much like working in kind of an international NGO type place where I would have like one foot on the ground, but like one foot also. Like I think the thing that the LSC made me realize was that I was also interested in policy, right? Like what is the
Yeah.
government doing? Like what does government response look like? How can
Right.
we make this better? Um, and and so I think I kind of wanted to straddle that world, right? Like not just work in direct services as I had done in San Francisco, but kind of work a bit at kind of the higher level of like, hey, I still want to be in touch with direct services, but I want to think about how we can do this better via like policy and via, potential interventions.
So
Yeah.
you graduate. So then you like try to apply for those jobs. What happens?
So I graduate, I apply for jobs. It's still very hard.
It's like 98 at this
This is
point. Is that
nine
right?
exactly. So this is 1998. I'm applying for jobs, and then a professor. So this is my first experience with how much professors can help in that I don't think, and I always tell this to my students now, which is like your professors do a lot more than just teach you classes. We also have contacts like all over. We know people, use us, right? Like get to
Hmm.
know us. So I I really this was the first time this happened where I met a professor who basically said to me, "Oh, my friend in Mexico is looking for a research assistant, and
Mm.
you may be good for this role for him."
Is that Paul
So
Gertler?
I know it was Prabhu Pingali.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I don't even know if you know this about me, Scott, but after the LSC, I end up in Mexico.
I did kind of know it, but I thought that that was linked to your work with Paul Gertler, but
That's
no.
that's later. That's later.
Oh, so you go to Mexico.
I go to Mexico. There's an organization there named CIMIT.
Huh.
And so CIMIT is part of the CGIAR system. So there's IFPRI in Washington, D.C., there's ERI in the Philippines, there's ICRISAT in India, there's CIMIT in Mexico.
Okay.
Let me tell you how crazy this is. I call Prabhu Pingali, who directs, he's now a professor at Cornell, by the way, but back then he was directing like the social science / economics group at CIMIT.
Yeah.
And he was doing a lot of research on the green revolution in agriculture. And basically, now I look back and I was like a glorified RA for him, but he was kind of looking for someone to help him work on this huge research agenda of his. And
Mm-hmm.
so I still remember calling him from my flat in London and we did like a phone interview.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically, like after that phone interview, he's like, okay, you're hired.
He's an economist. I actually don't know this gentleman.
Yeah, he's exactly.
Okay.
He's an
He's stationed
agricultural.
in Mexico, or is
He was,
he?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Where is he now?
Now he's at Cornell.
Oh, okay. He's a development economist working in Berkeley in Mexico. And is there like a match there? Like he's also interested in HIV and things like that?
Yeah.
No. So it's like that was your thesis, and
Yeah.
like you're moving on. Okay, got
Yeah.
it.
It was partly like, and I had this person offering me this job in Mexico, and it seemed really interesting. It was still kind of at the intersection of research and policy. So I basically pack up my bags and I moved to this town called Texcoco. So Texcoco is where CIMIT is based. And besides CIMIT, there's like nothing else in Texcoco. So, you're kind of I'm working every day and it's interesting, but I slowly start feeling a little bored because everyone around me there is like married or has children. And so eventually what I do is I rent. So I was living on the kind of CIMIT compound in an apartment. Eventually what I do is I move to Mexico City.
Hmm.
And then I start commuting back to Texcoco, which is about like, an hour each way. But at least then I'm kind of living in Mexico City. And so I end up working for Prabhu Pingali for a little over 2 years.
Oh.
And while
Wait,
I'm
so this is kind of the dream. Like this was kind of a little bit what you were always looking for, right?
exactly, it's
Oh,
very much.
that's
But here's,
great.
here's the irony. So while I'm working for Prabhu, he keeps telling me, like, you should apply for a PhD. And I keep saying, no, I don't want to apply for a PhD. I'm sort of, I feel like I've done enough schooling. And then, one day I still remember this conversation. He's like, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, oh, well, I want to be like you one day, right? I want to be kind of running the show and running up, because he was very much like running the show, right? For the social science group there and have my
Yeah.
research agenda. And he looks at me, and says, you realize like I have a PhD. And so like so that's kind of happening, but I will also say at the same time, what's happening at CIMMYT is so CIMMYT used to hire a bunch of like consultants to help them with their research. And
Uh-huh.
so Alan and Betty would come to CIMMYT. Alan Desjambry and Betty Sadoulay, who are professors at ARE at Berkeley, So
Right.
I would interact with them at CIMMYT. The other person, Doug Gollin, who's also Doug Gollin and Cheryl Doss, also development economists. Back then he was at Williams. They would also come to CIMMYT in the summertime.
So you're like interacting with all these
So I'm
economists.
exactly. So I'm interacting with all of these economists. Scott Rosell also who does a lot of work on China. So kind of unknowingly, I'm developing relationships and interacting with economists a lot. My boss is an
Mhm.
economist who's kind of urging me, right, to like apply for a PhD. Um, and yeah, so I guess all this to say, kind of after 2 years, I applied.
Mm.
And in a way, kind of the ARE program is one of my dream programs because I feel like it'll be like a good fit with the experience that I've had at CIMMYT. But I still have this dream of going back to working in health. And I think like I still really wanted to do more HIV work. I was also getting a lot more interested in nutrition, being at, kind of the agriculture focus and sort of
Mm.
nutritional issues and in
Mm.
international development. So I apply. I don't get in. Like, I
Mm.
don't, I'd applied to a few programs. I don't get into any of these programs.
What is
And
this, 99, 98?
this is 99 exactly. So I don't get in anywhere. Um,
You think it's the math?
well,
You
exactly. So I email and I was like, "Hey, what happened?" And I remember they basically tell me you don't have any of the math prerequisite.
right.
And like mind you, I was right, like I'm laughing but I tell this to students now. It's like being an econ undergrad in the US is like not enough to get you into any kind of econ grad school, right?
Yeah.
Because like and so then what I do is that year I move back to the US and I
Yeah.
basically for 1 year I just do math classes full time. I take multivariate calculus, I take linear algebra, I take probability and statistics. That's like for 1 year. And like that year, I'm also applying to graduate school again to be like,
You're
hey,
back home. You're living with your parents.
I'm back home.
You're
Exactly.
taking classes from Berkeley, or you're taking classes from a community college?
Actually, I should say, sorry, I wasn't back home. I did this in Boston.
Oh, you finally get to Boston.
I did. I was listen to. I was dating this guy who was working at the law school in Boston. So I go and
Uh,
we live there together, and so I'm doing these classes at UMass Boston.
oh, I got you. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Um, I apply
Your
again.
dad paying for those classes?
He was helping, but I will say, like living in Mexico,
Right. Dad, it always counts. You have to always pay for all these classes.
I
You
had
couldn't
saved up
use
money.
your logic, rationality brain. Keep
Yeah,
going.
it's true, but he also was not happy that I was like living with a guy unmarried. So that was a tick against me.
Yeah, sure. I get it. I get it. Okay, so you take all these
All
classes
these classes.
and you like do really good and you're back tapping into that love of math again. It's like it's fun.
It's fun. Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's fun again,
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You have to redeem it.
it felt a bit sad. I think about it now and I'm like, it's a bit sad, right, that I'd given up on all that math. So it was fun. I apply again. I get into ARE at Berkeley. I think I was gonna say also got into Cornell, and like those were in the end the kind of two big programs I was considering. And there was a part of me that was like, oh, I should go to Cornell because, I could live on the East Coast and blah, blah, blah. But
Mm.
then like Berkeley was just so much cheaper and there were really interesting people there doing development, Alana and
You
Betty.
knew ARE was known for development when you go there.
I did.
It
Yeah.
had its reputation
Yes.
at that
Yes.
time.
Yeah, because back then, if you wanted to do kind of applied development, you went to ARE. You didn't go to econ because the people in econ, like Pranav Bardhan was there in econ and he was great, but he was much more kind of theory and there was no all the serious applied micro data international development stuff at the time and was really happening at ARE at Berkeley. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like all these AR or all these like ag econ programs start becoming development economics, but Berkeley ARE seems like it was the very first one.
Yeah. I
It
think
had been like that for a little bit too, right? Or
yeah.
for a while.
Yeah, it
Oh,
did exactly. It really did.
I mean, it's like filled with economists even
Yeah,
back then, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
It's always been a very strong development oriented program. Yes.
Huh. So is Rocio Tutunik one of your colleagues, your classmates?
So she was a few years behind me.
Yeah.
But she ended up, I was gonna say, yeah, because she started in political science, I think, and then
Mhm.
but yeah, she was around.
Okay. Okay. So you get there
Yeah.
and, you know, I know that you and Sarah Baird become
Mhm.
friends. Are y'all in the same cohort?
She is 1 year behind me. So she's
Okay.
a year behind me. But yes, we ended up both being office mates, and our main advisor was Ethan Ligon. So yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're taking that first year. Are you taking all the Berkeley econ classes? You got to pass the prelim and all that stuff?
Yeah, so exactly. We have to do in ARE, you have to do the Berkeley Econ micro sequence,
Yeah.
but you
Uh-huh.
also have to do the ARE micro sequence. So we do double micro. But then we don't do that. Berkeley Econ students do like two, macro classes, and we don't have to do, we did, I took macro once, one semester with Akroloff, but we have less macro at ARE.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool though that you took it with him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do it. Are you happy that first year or are you
No,
miserable?
I'm miserable.
Okay.
I'm miserable. Totally miserable.
Uh,
I feel so unprepared. I had a lot of life and work experience and tons of like research ideas, and I was like so excited to come and do research. And then the first year, it's just all like math and problem sets and hard
mm,
economics, and I felt so underprepared. I just felt like I struggled so much with all the like problem sets and
yeah.
the work. I had also the programming. I
Y'all were having to do a lot of programming too because it's a very empirical
yeah,
program even in like 2000.
yes.
It's not just like econometric theory, like you're having to get into data immediately. I mean, I say that just because, you know, there was a time when I'm assuming like there was a time when first year students did not touch data and then all of a sudden they were, but you were from the very beginning. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So then you finish first year, you take your prelims. What happens then? How do you end up finding your
Hmm.
dissertation topic?
Yeah. So, we do. So I still had, I'd gone to ARA saying I want to work in health and development.
Yeah.
There's no actual professor at ARE, right, who works in health and development.
Yeah.
Um, you
There's
know,
not.
there's
Nobody at ARE is doing health and development?
not back then. And in fact, I would still say there's, it wasn't kind of an area of expertise. And
Huh.
so after I finished the
But
development,
you've got health and development in your head. That's what you're kind of wanting to do. You said nutrition, you had done the HIV stuff. You were interested in health and development, and you're kind of moving in that direction, but you
yeah,
just don't have you don't have any faculty that you can find.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I meet, there's this woman who used to take classes with us in the health policy program named Tanya Barham.
Oh,
And she actually eventually ends up moving over to ARE, but she says, oh, there's this guy at the business school named Paul Gertler
yeah.
who does, a lot of health and development work. You should go talk to him.
Oh,
Um, and so I do one day, I just kind of like show up at his office or office hours and we have this like funny conversation. I mean, the guy knows nothing about me, right? We just like chat. And it sort of feels a bit like how I get that job in Mexico the first time around with Prabhu, where we just had this like random phone conversation and Prabhu's like, move to Mexico. So same thing. I like 20 minutes, I talked to Paul and he's like, hey, do you want to go to Mexico this summer? And I am like, sure, like, yeah, and he says, well, there's this, I have this colleague so his colleague is Stefano Bertossi, who runs the kind of economics program, the health economics program at the INSP, which is like the Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública.
Uh-huh.
It's based in Cuernavaca, which is about an hour away from Mexico City. And he says they're working on this project there this summer, this sex worker project. And they wouldn't mind like an economist to come and work with them to think through like data collection and the survey. And do you want to go? And I'm like, yes. Right? Like dream come true. So he basically, he sends me to Mexico that summer.
Wow.
And that's the beginning of the risky business paper.
Risky business
Yeah,
paper.
yeah, that's the beginning. So,
But I thought Bertozzi was at like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
he does that after.
Oh, he does that after. Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
he does
So,
that.
so you're like Paul doesn't go there. You're
No,
the one, you go there.
I go there.
Okay, what are you doing? So
I,
walk me through the study.
I go there and I have to tell you, it was like the most fascinating summer because that summer they're working on the survey.
So for
And
the sake of the reader, this is like this paper
oh,
comes out in 2000, listener, paper comes out in 2005, Journal of Political Economy, Gertler, Shah, and Bertozzi, and is it called Risky Business, something? I'm trying to remember.
the market for unprotected sex.
Yeah, the market so it's an early, really, really early, clean estimating the return, compensating wage differential on unprotected sex. Okay, that's like the big thing. Okay, so now keep walking me through it.
Yeah. So I go there and we start working on the survey, but like the survey doesn't have and I still remember because an anthropologist sat across from me who was also, we would talk a lot and there were people in health economics, but I still remember in the early days, I had to fight a lot to get a lot of the standard like pricing and labor. So, I was familiar with like the econ style, like labor survey, right?
Yes.
And there was a lot of like, oh, we can't ask sex workers this type of stuff. Like they're never going to know the answers to these things. And so I
What
would
kind
be
of
like,
things?
just
Like they wouldn't know about prices?
yes, exactly. Like prices and income and earnings and right. And
Why do
so
you think they said that? Why do you think that they didn't see it as like work or something?
I,
Or
I
what was
don't
the deal?
know. But here's what I will tell you, which was so awesome, is that we would then, so we would kind of have these conversations in the office, and then we would go to brothels in Morelos, which is the state we were in, at night,
Yeah.
and like pilot questions and like pilot these surveys with them and see, can they answer these types of things?
Oh my gosh.
We did focus groups with them. And in the
Wow.
end, it was amazing because they could answer like
Of
everything.
course they could.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is their livelihood, right?
Right.
Um, and so I learned
You're doing all
so,
this, you're speaking fluent Spanish too. All
yeah.
that Spanish
I
is
mean, and
coming back.
I'm also with people from INSP, right?
Yeah.
I'm not just going in alone. And
Yeah.
but it was amazing. Like I spent so many nights in brothels, right? And just
Mm,
like kind of hanging out with sex workers, talking to them, hanging out with young researchers at INSP. It was like it was the most fabulous experience.
mm.
So then I get back after that summer, so we kind of work on stuff, collect data. I get back that summer and I tell Paul, like, I really want to go back.
You
Um,
didn't get the data, did you?
no,
You
I
didn't
mean,
field this panel that you're going to field, right?
it wasn't like it was still all happening. But I kind of, after that summer, I become very committed to like, I want to do a lot more on sex markets.
Mm.
And so kind of like the Mexico work. Yeah. And so anyways, all that to say, I end up then going back to Mexico. I write a grant so that I can spend more time there. I get some money, Paul helps fund some of this stuff. And so then I end up spending like almost an entire academic year during the PhD in Mexico. And at that time, I'm living with people like Leah Fernald, who's also doing research in Mexico. Sebastian Martinez is there. So it's
Mm.
just this real, like, vibrant community of, and then there's also all the researchers at INSP who are amazing and kind of doing their own research. And
Mm.
so it was a really good time for me to learn about like how to do research and to be on the ground. I then also end up, so then the Ecuador stuff, the job market paper and the Ecuador stuff happens because this is all like Steph kind of gets this huge Gates Foundation grant to do work in India and Ecuador. And I think there's like a third country. And so then I get involved on that project as well. And
So now
that's
it's got this Ecuador Mexico piece to it.
exactly.
Is
So
it
then
on sex work? He gets the grant that's going to be about sex work.
exactly. So my job market,
HIV though. It's like
exactly.
that's the hook is the HIV part, right?
Exactly. I should step back a minute and say the reason it's sex markets, right, in all these low income countries is because unlike rich countries, right, where the HIV/AIDS epidemic was very kind of centered and started in the kind of men who have sex with men community, in
Hmm.
most developing countries, the epidemic, kind of a focal point for the epidemic is really these sex markets, right? Because
Yeah.
like men migrate for work,
Yep.
they go have sex with sex workers and they come home to their rural communities. And so a lot of the early intervention, HIV intervention work was happening in sex markets in developing
Yeah,
countries.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that must have felt even cooler, just like knowing you were at a very important intersection of policy and health and development.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay, keep going. So you go back. You
So
go
I go
back.
back, exactly. I go back, but
Do
then
you
I
have in
also,
mind like this survey that you're going to do?
did I have in
The one
mind
that's going to be the one that's going to be in the paper?
the JPE paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was gonna say that one, that happens in Mexico, right? And we
Yeah.
collect the data.
You
Uh,
thought though, because remind me of the survey. It's a panel survey. Like a diary, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a panel, but it's a panel in that we ask each woman to tell us about her last three
Yeah,
transactions.
yeah. When I did my survey, I copied that. I had a piece like that. I copied it off of y'all because I loved it. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and so no, and so we collect that data, and I have to tell you, I'm spoiled, right? Because that was the very first real econ paper I ever wrote.
Yeah.
And it was such an easy paper to write in that any way you estimated this thing, the results were so robust.
Mm,
I will also say that the JP is like the first place we sent this paper. So like,
mm.
as a graduate student, I'm
You're
writing
like,
a
yeah, I'm just gonna
paper.
send all my papers to the JP and they're gonna publish them.
Exactly. And it's going to be so easy.
Right.
And then like, you get out of graduate school and you realize like how hard it actually is to publish.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What
and
was the premium? What was the unprotected? It was because it was the unprotected sex and there's like an interaction with attractiveness. So can you
yeah.
walk me through the big headline results again?
Yes, I definitely can. Can I motivate this quickly for
Yeah.
all of the listeners? So, one of the questions, a lot of the kind of intervention stuff that was happening with sex workers at the time was like these educational interventions about like risk and condom use. And so
Yeah.
there was just this big
Do they
question.
like go to door and like kind of have these like little pamphlets and stuff? They like
And
do
like,
a, they do an educational intervention.
exactly. They were
Yeah,
mostly
because
through
Bijou
brothels.
Rao kind of has Bijou has like a thing where he uses it as an instrument. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so I think just a big open question was with with the beginning of HIV AIDS, right? Where
Mm,
getting HIV AIDS back, again, kind of back then, death sentence, like why are women still engaging in non-condom use, right? It was still a
mm,
very big question because everything would seem to suggest that like, no, everyone should be using condoms now. And so,
mm,
so I think like what was cool about this paper was that we basically showed that the reasons, right, that these sex workers were engaging in non-condom use is because males have, the clients have these preferences for non-condom use, and they're actually willing to compensate. And so like,
mm.
like in other sectors, whether it's like mining or police or fire, there's just this like compensating wage differential for risk, right? And so these
Well, the
women,
other thing is like in those jobs, you have no within worker variation in the risk. You're like, I work in a coal mine. It's not like somebody says, tell me about your last 3 days in the coal mine. You're like, it was always risky in the coal mine. It's like here you've got like this is where the fixed effect part of it was so neat, like the within variation in the unprotected sex. I mean, how big is the effect? Do you remember? It's been like a
yeah,
minute.
I mean, just the kind of average effect is like 15%, 14, 15%. But then when you interact it with things like, oh, if she's very attractive,
Oh,
right?
that's what it was. Yeah, yeah.
It
She has
becomes
like,
the more bargaining power she has, right? The more beautiful she is, the higher the premium she can charge.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So you do this bargaining part. That's so cool. That's so cool. You must have been so excited when so you go on the market. Did you think when you went on the market? Because I mean, before you and I even met, you were just still writing so many papers with Paul and then with Trevone Logan
Mhm.
about sex work.
Yeah.
Did that experience just late make you go, I've got a bunch of papers inside me that I got to write on this topic
Yeah, I mean, yes, I did. And I will say I didn't actually go on the market with the
with the
JP.
JP? Oh, you didn't.
I
Okay.
went on the market with an Ecuador so it was actually looking at the impact of like, in fact, this paper is a precursor to like our work, right? But it was looking at the regulatory environment of sex work in Ecuador and looking
Mm.
at, outcomes related to regulation. Um, but yeah, I have to say, like, it's just such a fascinating market. And partly why it's always been fascinating to me is because so much of economic theory, you
Yeah,
always think like economic theory isn't going to be relevant here, but it's in fact more relevant.
I
Like
know.
this market operates like such a standard kind of market.
Yep.
Yet it's also a market that economists almost never look at, right? Or study.
Right.
Um, and you and I have talked a lot about this, but I often feel like so much of the work that gets done around sex markets is done by activists and not
Yep.
sort of serious researchers. And so I feel
Yep.
like that's what I had to bring to the table, right? Which was like,
Yep.
hey, let's actually do serious research on this market because this
Hmm.
market impacts a lot of people in many different ways, and we need to
Hmm.
understand it better.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved I loved that decade you and I spent working together on that paper. It was some of the best years for me ever. Um, yeah, I loved it. You were the best partner that I could have had, like go on that journey together with it. It was wonderful. I just loved it.
I agree. I I was thinking about like you and I are both very intense slash workaholic slash never sleep.
Yeah, right.
And so I think there needs to be a lot of intensity to write a top five.
Hmm.
I think there was something about the interaction of like those things that I could text you at 3 a.m. with like an idea I was having, and then you would respond at 4 a.m., right? And not
Yeah.
many people, I think this is something I often miss in other relationships with co-authors who have more like, regular lives and regular
Yeah.
schedules. And Um, I feel like that worked for both of us, right?
I know, we both, that's so funny you say that because I actually kind of felt like well, you're not crazy like I am. I always kind of felt like the odd couple, where I was the insane one and you were, but what I appreciated about you as a co-author was, you never made me, you always took, I felt like we both really, really saw a lot of value in the other person. And so we had like a lot of really good, long, hard conversations that I don't have that I haven't had that either, with really very many, maybe not anyone. Todd, you would have liked Todd Kendall, and I had that too, but it was different with you and me. I really did I loved all it's so funny you sharing all that ethnographic stuff. We did a lot of that too.
Yep. Yep.
Interviewing that defense attorney a bunch of times, and then hiring that student from Brown to go down to the library and
Yep.
collect all those newspapers. That was just really fun. Felt like we were like Indiana Jones kind of.
No, I agree. I mean, and I still, in all of my projects, even though I'm an economist, I feel like I really value all the qualitative
Me
work
too.
and all of the talking to people. And that's honestly where so much of the research comes from, right?
I
And
know.
sure, you can like do a survey and collect a bunch of data, but it's the talking to people, the
Yeah.
focus groups, the all that stuff that
That's
really.
so cool that you did those focus groups. Well, so okay. I've been keeping you for like 75 minutes, but uh so, what are you excited about now going forward? I mean, now you're like a very senior economist in the profession, and I mean, you're like a big deal. Um,
Who would have
and
ever thought, right?
well, I always knew that. You're always a big deal to me, but I mean, it's like very cool to see you back at Berkeley, and I'm so proud of you and everything. But like, what now that you're that professor, that you had in college, like what excites you about this next chapter?
I think here's the first thing I want to say, Scott. Like, it hasn't always been easy for me, right? Because as a junior person studying sex market, so let me step back and say, like, I feel like these days studying gender is cool.
Hmm.
But back in the day, right, in the 90s, early 2000s, like, none of this work was that
Oh,
acceptable, right? And
yeah,
I'm sure there were many people who probably thought I would never get a job studying the things I was studying.
yeah.
And I should also say shout out to my ARE advisor, Ethan Ligon, who is also very, very supportive of my crazy research agenda. But I always, early in my career, I used to joke to people that I study sex and poo, because the other thing we haven't talked much about is I was doing a lot of work on kind of sanitation and health,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And
right,
um,
right.
and so in a way, I'm saying all this because I just feel grateful. I feel
Yeah.
grateful that I've had such a, in the end, a successful career, because it was never clear to me from the early days that I would have a successful career studying
Mm,
the things that I
mm,
wanted to study, right?
mm.
Because I can't tell you how many awkward seminars I've had in front of a room full of like 30 men talking about sex, right?
Yeah,
But you just like, you have to keep doing it because you feel like it's important, right? And
right.
somebody needs to hear these things. And
Mhm.
so I guess like the one thing is I feel grateful now that it's a lot of, people have realized this is important work. Economists are now realizing gender is actually something important. So important that like, we got the Nobel Prize in gender recently, right?
Yeah, right, right.
So going forward, I think, these days I'm doing, I'm just as excited about my research. I'm doing a lot of work, I think, on adolescents these days, which I'm finding exciting.
Yeah.
But I think maybe some of the things that I'm doing more of now that I'm trying to interact more with governments. I'm trying to kind of interact at a higher level, like with public policy, and
Mm,
maybe get some of this change to happen, get some of this research into the hands of people who actually need it, who are on the ground making
mm.
policy. I didn't used to do things like that when I was junior because, we're always so focused on getting tenure, right?
Right, right.
And now I have time for more of these things. I also think, I spend more time these days with students and
Hmm.
I think like one of the things I didn't realize going into this career, right? We think we're going to have big impacts through our research.
Hmm.
But in fact, I think many of the big impacts we have is through the students that we interact, right? With the students we teach and I can't tell you how many times students have emailed me saying, oh, like it's so meaningful to like see a woman up there teaching micro. And like I know that's to be true because like if I think about my entry into econ, it was, the first econ class I ever took was, and so things like that, like uh,
Hmm.
they're important to me. They're meaningful. They're sort of I find different meaning in my work these days.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Um, so how do I word this?
Hmm.
You now are at Berkeley,
Yeah.
and you've seen basically, like, like me, like, let's just round up to like 20 cohorts of students after you've graduated.
Yeah.
And if you had to give like general advice, or like, I don't know, maybe specific advice of what you see as like the challenges that you see that students probably are going to have that they maybe don't see, that you think, I just want you to know that blah, 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 blah. Like, what would you say out there into the world that's like, to a struggling student or to a student that might be about to step into a landmine? What kind of like general things do you think like probably hold that are kind of timeless, that you think they just need to hear it?
I think research can be very lonely.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think ultimately you really have to believe in yourself, right? You have to believe that what you're doing is meaningful. And so, one thing I always tell students is when you're thinking about like the thing that you're going to research, right, for your job market paper, it can't be something that's just gonna like get you a good job, but you don't care that much about. Because it's something that you're going to obsess about and think about and stand in your shower and think about. You're going to go to
Mhm.
bed at night thinking about this. And so it needs to be something that like you feel passionate about, that you care about, and sometimes I worry that young people these days, a lot of it is like strategic, right? Like
Mhm.
what class, and I think at least for me, part of why I feel like I stay in this career and why I keep working and why I still burn the midnight hours thinking about problems is because I feel like what I'm doing is important to me and I believe
Yeah, to you. Right.
me. I mean, and that's the thing. It may not be something that other people believe in, but it needs to be something that you believe in, right? That you
Yep.
think is important.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
that's what's going to keep you going during the hard times. Because this is a tough career.
Yep.
The PhD years were some of the hardest of my entire life. To this day, I will say that, much harder than having children,
Mhm.
much harder than many of the other harder things I've done. And like,
Yeah.
so part of it is just, what is it that you can do, right, to kind of make sure you're doing work that you believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Manisha, you are my best friend of the co-author friends, and you're one of my best friends. So I am so grateful for meeting you randomly and for you answering my email, because you are one of the best people in the profession, one of the best people on the planet. I love you, and I love your husband. I love your kids. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Can I also just say that I'm very proud of you and your career has also gone in an amazing direction. And so anyways, I feel like we both had this amazing experience writing the paper together.
Mm.
And, both of our careers have sort of taken off in very different ways. But like I feel very lucky that you emailed me that day and that I answered, and and we ended up writing this. Scott
I
hasn't said
know.
this, but we didn't actually meet in person for many, many years.
We talked all the time. Oh my gosh. When messages, iMessages or whatever it was called, got on my laptop, I was like, all I'm gonna do is talk to Manisha non-stop. It was so much fun learning synthetic control together
It
too.
was. It was.
Just it was so much fun. Nobody was using it, and we were like trying to figure it out and code it up. It
Yeah.
was so cool. I never told you this. I don't think I told you this. My youngest daughter, Ren, because it's like, we worked on that paper from like 2009 and we didn't publish it until 2018. So that's like 9 years. So like that would have been, 25% of my whole life, and then like half of my adult life on it. And, it was like my daughter Ren was born in '07. So like her whole life, all she knew was I was working on it. One day somebody like at school asked, "What does your dad do?" And then she said, "He discovered Rhode Island." That's like she didn't really understand what we were working on. She just thought that we discovered Rhode Island. So I was like, well, when you're older, I'll maybe explain the paper a little better to you. But that's probably just fine. Well, so good. So maybe we can see each other in person soon. It's so good to see you all. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, John.